Thank you to everybody for joining tonight, either in person or on the webinar. I'm really excited to share some thoughts that I have about the role of user experience in product design. Start with an introduction. That's me, the bald guy with the beard and the glasses. So I lead our user experience design group here at Design Concepts. My background is in a variety of things. I went to school at UW-Madison, started with a computer science focus, and then shifted to fine art, and then ultimately design. Coming out of school, I started working on my own, finding freelance design clients, people who would pay me to design stuff for them, and at the time, it turned out that a lot of people wanted help with their website. So I got into website design and development, and then ultimately found myself doing the same thing for Trek Bicycle out in Waterloo, Wisconsin, not too far from here. There were a couple people in the audience, and a couple people who worked at Design Concepts previously worked with me. When I was at Trek, I started designing for some of their secondary brands. A lot of the work for high-profile brands like Trek and Gary Fisher was done with the skillful hands of agency partners. And then over time, as I wanted to be responsible for more and the portfolio of brands whittled down, I decided to try to in-source all of that design work and ultimately build a UX team inside of Trek to do all of that design and development. There I was responsible for design and front-end development, so I maintained that kind of duality where I was thinking about design and thinking about software development, and worked on a lot of great things. I had a lot of fun working at Trek. It really pushed me and helped me grow as a designer. Worked on all of Trek's B2C websites, and then eventually kind of shifted into focusing on some B2B and thinking about how my UX team could help that part of the organization. And along the way, people started hearing about this guy that was doing UX stuff and how that was a little different than what the other designers did. And I got pulled into physical product development. So I started working with the Bontrager team that did components and accessories and apparel on cycling computers, and thinking about how I could take the skills that I had as an interaction designer and help people enjoy good experiences on Trek's various websites and bring that into the physical product development process. That led me to thinking about what is UX and what kind of designer do I want to be? Do I want to continue focusing the majority of my time working on the web, or would I be interested in seeing what other types of product development are like? And that brought me to Design Concepts, where we do all sorts of product development. We do primarily physical product development, but increasingly we're doing a lot of digital product development. I'll talk a little bit more about how that's happening in my talk. If you want to talk about UX tonight, you can talk to me. After the talk, you can also talk to Colin and Jared, who are here from our UX team, as well as anybody else in Design Concepts. One of the things I'd really like to establish very early in this talk is that designing for a user experience is something that requires a tremendous amount of collaboration from people across a variety of different backgrounds with different skill sets. So while we may be the user experience design team, everybody at Design Concepts, whether they're a design researcher, or a strategist, or a human factors engineer, we're all contributing to the experience that a person has with a product or service, so we're all happy to talk with you about UX. What is user experience? I think that's a good spot to start. It's also a very controversial question. According to Don Norman, who was an employee at Apple Computer in the early days of personal computing, user experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. That's quite ambitious, right? So who could possibly design user experience design if you have to take all those things into account? The truth is that it's not one single person that is able to do that. This is a Venn diagram from Dan Saffer. He is the design director at Jawbone. And here he's outlining the various disciplines or core skills that make up user experience design. You'll see things like interaction design, human-computer interaction and visual design, information architecture. These are things that I had experience with in my background. And then you'll see other things like architecture and industrial design and a few different forms of engineering from mechanical to electrical. These are things I did not have a lot of experience with. I was trusting that my partners on the project were going to bring those things to the table, and I learned a lot during my first few projects working on physical devices, where the worlds of software and hardware hadn't yet intersected. We weren't working together frequently. So I would state it's not possible for one person or even a department of people to be able to do all of this. So the next question is, does user experience equal UX? UX is a word that's thrown out a lot. And I think when people say UX, they sometimes mean all of this, but more often than not, they're really talking about what happens at that intersection of interaction design and social design. And depending on the particular product that the team is designing, it's going to require variable amounts of information architecture. If you're designing a product that incorporates search in many varieties, whether it's Google-style search or faceted search on an e-commerce website, I hope that information architects are contributing to the design of that product. But often, I see posts for jobs, and I talk to designers at events and conferences, and they say they do UX, and really they're just doing graphic design and applying it to a software. Sometimes they go a little deeper than that, and then they're actually thinking about how information needs to be structured and how the product needs to behave in response to the user's interaction or the interaction from the other parts of the system within which the product resides. I'd like to think that as we go, we can kind of just set aside the fact that we don't use terminology correctly and just strive to do really great design. I think ultimately good UX is just good product design, and that's why here at Design Concepts and other veteran firms that practice a human-centered approach, we really start by understanding what it is that people need so that we can design to meet and exceed their expectations, and then we can actually say that we're doing user experience design. We'll bring other people along for the ride with us as they're writing copy for marketing materials, and they're answering the phone when someone calls for customer service. All those things really contribute to the experience that a person has using your products, your services, because UX is really just the interface to your company for all of your customers. So how did we get here? How did we get to this map where all these things started forming together and merging? I think it comes down to our love affair with computers that has been evolving over the last 100 years. I'd like to walk you through a few eras in human-computer interaction. Computers are machines, and it used to be that we interacted with machines like automobiles and appliances in our kitchen, and then along came companies like IBM and some really smart people working at Xerox and Stanford doing research around computers, and they presented us with this new kind of machine that could take something that we put into it and it could turn something else out. So the first era of human-computer interaction was the mainframe era. It started in the 1960s. You had really big machines, which meant they were expensive, they took up a lot of space, and people didn't really know how to use them unless you were specially trained in how to operate that machine. The result was that there was often one computer per many users. The way you interacted with these machines was via punch cards, keyboards, and command line prompts. Today, okay, just like pull up YouTube and do a search for kids responding to mainframe computers, or even PCs, which is the next era, and you'll get some funny results. What pushed us out of this mainframe era in the history of human-computer interaction was Moore's Law. It was really just the rate at which technology was becoming cheaper and more effective. So speeds were increasing at such a rate that it allowed people to innovate rapidly and think about new models for how we would interact with these machines and what type of value you could extract out of that interaction. Douglas Engelbert was one of those people. He worked at Stanford, and he invented the mouse. And if you're curious, you should watch his mother of all demos. It's like a 3-hour-long segment where he basically shows you how computers are going to be for the next 100 years. And it was incredible. It takes some patience to get through it, but it's pretty cool to see if you're a fan of computers. So there it is. There's a modest mouse. And there's the graphical user interface that was developed during this time period at Xerox PARC, building upon some of the ideas that Douglas Engelbert and his team were working on. That drags us into the next era, the personal computer era, which really was established in the 1980s. There were personal computers before that, but they didn't have the graphical user interface. They didn't have the keyboard and mouse as standard issued accessories. So it didn't really kick off until computers like the original Macintosh were introduced in 1984 before you could say that there was one computer available per user. Maybe not in your home, but I was in kindergarten in 1985, and I remember being able to go to the computer lab and use a Macintosh. That was amazing, right? This machine that could take my input and present something back to me inspired me to the career that I'm in now. And that's something that some people started seeing in their jobs. They didn't have to go down the hall where the and ask Betty, who knew how to operate the punch cards to process something. They were being asked to learn how to use that machine because it was either in their space or at their desk. So it really was the graphical user interface, the keyboard and the mouse, that allowed us to have a relationship with the computer in a more personal way. And then the internet came along, or the internet was here. It was really the World Wide Web that came along. And it showed us what we could use computers for. It wasn't just about typing papers and making pictures in Microsoft Paint. There was all this information that was at our fingertips. And I am using this website because it's a classic. It's for the Space Jam movie. It still exists, so if you want to see the Space Jam website as it was in 1996, it's still there for you. But Tim Berners-Lee, the guy that invented the, really was onto something. What happens when you connect all these documents to each other with hyperlinks, and you can navigate and access this world-wide web of information? What could you do with that? Well, you couldn't do much if you didn't have a computer, so people just started flocking to computers. We all remember having AOL, listening to our dial-up modem. We were frustrated and trying to access this information. But it dragged us into the next era of human-computer interaction, which is where we are now. We're in the mobility era. So now, there are several computers per person. There's one in a box or a closet here. There's one in my pocket. There's one in the bag. There might be one on wrist there. We sometimes have a hard time recognizing what is a computer and what isn't a computer because we're surrounded by them. And in this era of computing, it's really the natural user interface that is defining our interaction with computers and software. So this is the Wii remote. I can gesture with the remote to control the software running on that game computer. In the same way I can gesture by swiping on my phone or pinching the zoom. I can stand in front of Microsoft Connect and I can go like this, and the avatar of me on screen mirrors my movements. We're able to tell computers what we would like them to do in a way that's more natural for us as humans. And like I said, the computers are just all over the place. So the thing that's going to drag us into the next era of human-computer interaction is the Internet of Things. This is Amazon Echo. She's got a family staring around this black cylinder like it's a object in a Stanley Kubrick movie. And they're talking to it, right? So again, it's a natural user interface. They're using their own voice to prompt the computer to fetch information and provide it back to them. So what's next? It's the Ubiquity era. As these computers are smaller and more capable, and we can hide them in stuff, like our jewelry, our clothing, our appliances, toys, furniture, there will be thousands of computers per user. And we probably won't even know that we're interacting with the computer. It'll just be so seamless. It'll feel conversational, and it'll help improve our life, or so people think. So where does UX fit into all of this? Well, you can imagine with so many computers powered by software, someone has to design this stuff, right? So the general interest in UX is on a steep climb. This is the Google search trends for UX. Somewhere in here, when the original iPhone was introduced, people learned what UX was. And then it just kept climbing and climbing, and it's still climbing today. Same thing for jobs, right? There's lots of people looking to incorporate UX into their product development process. I think a lot of people don't really know what it is, and that's okay, because we're in this period, this messy middle, where we're really learning about this new practice of design. I think a lot of people have been doing components of it for a very long time, but we don't have the language and vocabulary to talk about it with each other in a way that's consistent. So when you say this, everyone understands that this is what you mean. Architects have that. Industrial designers have that. Those are much more established practices. But UX is still a new thing. Ultimately, I think what it comes down to is UX is on the rise because there's an increase in relevance. You're depending on computers more, and software, saying that powers computers, is becoming the medium through which we experience a lot of the physical world around us. So what do UX designers actually do? I think there's a core skill set that you'll find in UX teams. First is user research. Second is information architecture. Third is interaction design. Fourth is visual design. And the fifth is user testing. And if I could be so bold to suggest, I think the ones that are unique to software, or at least come from software, are information architecture and interaction design. I think there's reasons why user research and user testing have flourished in the software product development world. The ability to actually watch what people are doing with your product in real time and view those telemetrics and make decisions about how to improve the product going forward have caused some of these other skill sets to rapidly evolve and push into other fields of study, but they didn't come from software necessarily. People have been going and talking to people about what their needs are for a very long time. Ethnography is an old practice, and testing is something that engineers have done since the beginning of time. You make a prototype of something and you see how it works, and if it doesn't work, you fix it and make it better for the next iteration, right? Visual design, we know that that comes from graphic design. It's just a way to visually communicate and express our ideas through the lens of a brand. So that's pretty old. Information architecture and interaction design, kind of a special sauce of UX though, right? So we're talking about digital products. There's this abstract information space that has to be mapped, plotted, and interaction design is really how does a user find their way through that virtual space. So in a little bit more detail, user research is about observing people, tasks, tools, and environments, better understand their behaviors, needs, and motivations. So this talks about the role of UX in product design. So user research contributes to product design context. Without context, you don't really know what problem you're trying to solve for people and whether or not your proposed solution is actually going to help them or hurt them. Information architecture then is structuring content to facilitate intuitive use of a product, helping users find and consume information that is both useful and relevant. Its contribution to overall design is structure. Interaction design is ideating how a product should behave in response to interaction from both users and the larger system within which it operates. I think people often forget that second part, right? Especially if we're talking about software, or more specifically web-based software that's connected to other software running on other computers. My phone can remind me to do something when it senses I left a certain geographic perimeter around my house, right? I initially told it to do that, but now my phone is detecting the large system with which it operates, which in this case is just geolocation, where I am on planet Earth. So interaction design is contributing behavior to the definition of a product design. Visual design is all about enhancing the aesthetics of content and its interface in alignment with the appropriate brand personality. So sometimes people think about visual design as, like, I'm going to apply a look and feel to something. Other people approach it as, what are the attributes or the qualities that we want this product to embody, and how can we express that while also enhancing the usability? So the way something appears can affect whether a person cognitively understands that this is something I can interact with, and when I do so, this is how I should expect it to behave. And finally, user testing, which is evaluating a product with its users to determine whether it currently meets their needs, catalog any risks. That part's really important if we're talking about designing something for healthcare. You know, we don't want to do harm to the patient or the clinician that's using the product. We also do user testing to identify opportunities for improved usability and to measure users' overall satisfaction. So user testing contributes feedback. It's our mechanism that enables iteration. Without that feedback, we don't know how to improve the product. At least we can't tie it to something that the user actually needs. We might use a genius design methodology where we show people things and listen to some of the feedback and then decide for ourselves how to make things better. But true user testing is going to get to the bottom of what needs to be improved. What does the UX process look like? Well, it varies. What I'd like to do is walk through an example using a project that we worked on to talk about how we do UX. We do a lot of work for clients that's confidential, and while I would love to show you that stuff, we're going to wait till it's all on the market. Before we do so, there's a couple examples in our atrium. We've got some case studies. So instead, what I'm going to do is walk you through this project that we created so that we can share with our clients and with our peers how we go about UX at Design Concepts. The concept is for a gift exchange app. And it starts with a question, like I think a lot of good design should. How might an app improve the experience of participating in a holiday gift exchange? So this is a hypothetical project. I'll walk you through how we might go about understanding whether or not this hypothesis is true, and then how we would go about designing a solution to meet the needs of people hosting and participating in a gift exchange. We would start with user research. We actually started by watching an episode of The Office, which is great if you haven't seen that. You learn a lot about the frustrations of gift exchanges. So with contextual inquiry, we would learn a lot about user behavior. We would actually go to a holiday gift exchange and interview people about their experience. We would make sure to identify if there's different roles that people assume during this event, and we would interview people asking specific questions about their role, what tools they need to accomplish their tasks, if there's any workarounds that they currently have because they don't have a tool. And we would try to understand their motivations, their needs, and pain, ultimately, right? Because without pain, there's nothing that we can improve upon. We might take an idea with us into the field for that research. So this storyboard describes a potential future scenario to all of those research participants to facilitate discussion and solicit learning so that we would know, is there an opportunity here for us? Are we starting on a sound foundation? So maybe this app would start with, the storyboard would start with, invite your family, friends, or coworkers to your holiday party and to participate in a gift exchange. Communicate event and gift exchange details, including the format of the exchange. Is it a Secret Santa gift exchange? Is it a White Elephant gift exchange? If people don't know, you're going to end up with the Office episode, right? Where Michael buys a $500 iPod and doesn't want anybody except for Ryan to have it. So you can see how real quickly and early in our process, using a narrative and some illustrations, we can begin to talk about what this future state might be, and then we can ask the people that we interview in the field, does this sound like something that would improve the experience for you? And what's great about it is really just a sketch and some words, so if we're off, they can tell us, and they feel like they have permission to tell us. If we came into the field and we had a finished looking thing, people might be hesitant to say, you're doing it wrong. But with this, it feels like it's still, a napkin sketch. Coming out of that contextual inquiry, we would want to take inventory of everything that we observe. So we would use a tool like an experience map to do that. We would plot the current gift exchange experience to identify pain points and highlight opportunities for design to improve it. So we might think about, how can this experience be broken up into phases? Like, there's a planning phase. At this point, only one person is on this path of the gift exchange because they're thinking, I'm going to make this event. I'm going to host an event, right? And they have to invite people. And then, depending on how many people respond with their RSVP, the host might have to change their plans for the event. So there's another round of planning, and so on and so forth. So we'll get all those details down, what activities we saw people engaging in the field, and we'll also capture some of the other things that we saw, like how were they feeling, or sorry, the things that we heard. How are they feeling? What's making them nervous or frustrated about the experience? In this particular case, we would hopefully discover that the experience for the host and the participants is different, and at a certain point they diverge and have a different path. We would also learn that if we're doing a secret assignment type gift exchange, more commonly called Secret Santa, but there's other variations on that, that you would have one set of activities that you engage in, and that if you're participating in a swap pool, something like a white elephant gift exchange, there would be slightly different parameters that would drive your experience. Here's an example of something that we might do with our information architecture skills to help lay some groundwork for this new product. We might model all of the content, taking inventory of information needed by the host and their guests throughout the gift exchange experience. This helps us model not only the content, but also its interrelationships. So there's an event, and the event has to have an exchange type. Is it a secret assignment, or is it a swap pool? The event also has to have a guest list, and the host has to be able to add and remove people from that guest list. And for each guest, they need a name and an email address and an RSVP status. And this content just spiders off. And because it's really taking inventory of the information that people need in order to achieve their tasks and goals while participating in a gift exchange, it becomes the first view that we have of this abstract information space, which can translate into the structure for the product itself. So this is a screen map where we've translated that content into a map of the app's potential screens or screen states. A state being, I haven't left the screen, but I did something that caused the information or controls that are presented to me to change. It also shows the interrelationships between those screens and suggests a navigational hierarchy. So what path might I take through this product as I'm using the software? So maybe there's an event dashboard, where as the host, I can see my events. I can get details about them, the guest list. One of the things that we might learn while we're interviewing people in the field is that they need a way to communicate with each other. The host needs to communicate details about the event to their guests, especially if those details change. And let's say that we're doing a Secret Santa gift exchange. You might want to communicate anonymously with the person for whom you're buying a gift. So, ask some questions. What kind of stuff do you like? Are you into Kenny G, or are you more of a Michael Bolton guy? What kind of food do you like? Is it buns from Umami? Tamales from Tex Tub? So now that we have our first pass at how the app will be structured, we kind of set that aside. And now we think about the tasks, or a specific task that the user might need to complete. And we think through all of the sequential steps that they need to go through in order to complete that task. And we call that mapping out a screen flow. So these are just a series of interactions and the associated information and controls that we need to present to a user in order for them to be able to logically progress through their task. So when creating events, there's a certain order within which you do that. And some of this transcends apps and software. It's just like how you do things in the world, right? Because we're really trying to take what's natural for people and provide them that experience in our product. One of the reasons why we create artifacts is so that we can communicate our design intent. So with screen flows as an example, this is one way that we can specify the app's overall system behavior, and we can share that with our software developer teammates to begin assessing technical feasibility and help them plan for their programming activities. So here we're just capturing that flow that in the host's path, when we're onboarding them and introducing them to the product, there's a series of things that they might need to do to get started, and that might be different than what the guest needs to do, right? Also falling into the interaction design skill set is wireframe models, where we take inventory of the content and controls required on each app screen. So if we have that screen flow that says the user starts here, and then they progress to this, and along the way we're showing them this information and these controls so they can make decisions, a wireframe model takes those requirements and it presents them in a single screen where we can take inventory of all of those pieces of information and controls and suggest the appropriate hierarchy. This is really more about the behavior and the content than it is about how it looks and feels, but you can imagine that as you're establishing that information hierarchy, you're naturally going to start to make some choices about layout and how you present information. But really what this artifact is good for is talking about how the software should behave and what information and controls need to be available on each screen. This becomes the architectural plan for the software development team so that they understand what needs to be available on each and every screen. And in my past, when working with software developers, especially ones that are fun and flexible, they know that from this point forward, things are going to change, but there's enough here that they can get started. They can start thinking about, okay, where's this data going to live? Okay, it's going to come from this data source, or I got to create this database, and this is how the database wants to be structured based on how the information is going to be structured in the product. So we would literally go through and based on how much documentation our developers need, we would outline each and every element on the screen and talk about what it is and how the user can interact with it. Visual design is one of the other core skills of a UX team. So one of the things that we might do in parallel with some of the information architecture and interaction design activities is to start thinking about how we can embody the brand personality into the product. So for this particular app, our gift exchange app, we would host a experience attributes workshop, and we would bring to that workshop things that we find visually inspiring, things that we really think would be a great quality to express in the product. So we're looking at found images that we collect from various sources, and then we sort and categorize those so that we can narrow down what are the things that resonate with us and what are the things that we want to avoid doing with visual design. And we might arrive at a series of attributes that really are important to have people feel when they use the product. So we might pick playful, warm, crafted, and orderly. And then for each of those, using a tool called a style tile, we would explore how can we best visually express that in its purest form. So using color and typography and pattern and illustration, we would see what playful feels like and warm. But obviously, we don't want the product to just feel like one of those. We want it to feel like the set of those. So in a second iteration, we would maybe take the most preferred elements from each of those style tiles and try to create Frankenstein. So which of the font and color and layout and, sorry, not layout, illustration styles do we like best, and try to combine those all into one look and feel. And then we would apply that look and feel to the various screens. So taking those wireframe models as our blueprint, we would then apply the color palette and the typography, really focusing on how we can not only express the brand personality, but enhance the usability. So things that should be navigable look like active controls. We would also, at this point, have to think about the realities of designing for multiple platforms and devices. So on the left, you see an iOS version on an iPhone. On the right, you see an Android version on a HTC phone, maybe. And we know that regardless of the device that our user has, we want them to know that they're having an experience with our brand. But we also want to respect the fact that there's different patterns that that user expects based on their choice of device. So maybe the way that you access the main navigation needs to be different across platforms. But there's still an opportunity to craft a consistent thread of aesthetics throughout all platforms. And again, because software developers are the people who make the products that we design, we want to make sure that we create tools for them to translate our design intent into the actual product. So we might specify the visual design system. All those choices about the look and feel can be cataloged here in this document, and we can specify how that gets applied to each interface element and screen of the app. On some projects I've worked on, you would literally design every screen and you would create a bunch of red lines and measure stuff. And on other projects I've worked on, you take it at more of like a systems level where you talk about here are the rules for typography and applying color, and you show examples of each, and then really good developers can pull that all together when they're actually building each of the pages or screens. User testing is the fifth core skill set of a UX team. In this example, early on, when our ideas are just emerging, we might have employed a preference test. So using low fidelity prototypes, in this example, just paper drawings, we might meet with users or potential users and ask them which of these concepts do they prefer. As our design continues to evolve through each iteration, we might be beyond the paper prototyping phase and ready to put an interactive prototype in front of people. Ultimately, software is something that you touch and you interact with, and the experience changes over time based on the choices that you make. So the earlier you can put something digital and interactive in front of people, the better feedback you're going to get. So we might take some very early wireframes and stitch those into a sequence of screens. And the good news for us who do UX is that we're in a renaissance of tools right now. There's all kinds of tools available. Lots of them are free or really cheap, and they're easy to learn to use. And you don't even need to be a designer necessarily in order to create the prototype if you're provided the screens from a designer. You literally just drag and drop all these screens into a website, and then you can draw a box and say, when someone clicks on this area of the screen, I want them to navigate to this other page or screen. So you can create a linear sequence of screens, and then you can put it in front of somebody and say, I'd like you to tell me, how might you do this from this screen? Or where would you expect to go if you'd like to find this information? Or if you were looking to update the details about the event, you have to change the time. How would you go about doing that? And as long as you've prepared the necessary screens in order for them to do that, you can pull this off without having to write any software. Again, as the design evolves and it becomes more mature, it might be time to focus more on how effectively and efficiently the user is able to complete their task than asking them, do you prefer this concept or this concept? So we would use usability evaluation methods to do that. And we can use prototypes at various levels of fidelity, but they have to have some kind of behavioral integrity in order to do that, right? So we might make a prototype at the end that looks and feels like the app that we intend to deliver with all the visual design applied, and have people walk through a series of screens. Maybe this is showing what the initial experience is like for people as they create their account or get signed in if they've been here previously. We'll skip ahead. They've created an event, and they're able to look at their guest list and see who's coming. So hopefully that gives you a taste of how user testing, information architecture, interaction design, visual design, and user testing, user research would be applied to create a software product like this, or at least a concept for one. So where does UX go from here? We talked earlier about how UX could mean designing software products like this gift exchange app, or it could mean something much more broad and grand about designing user experiences, right? I think there's three things we have to consider if we're going to discuss where UX is headed next, and then I hope we can talk about it together with some Q&A and some discussion. The boundaries between hardware and software are blurring all the time. I was at CES in January, and we talk about how computers are everywhere. Bill, our industrial design director, and I saw computers in cars and in scooters and watches and basketballs, right? Computers and sensors are literally being put into everything, and people aren't necessarily asking if they should be, right? So I think as these boundaries between hardware and software development continue to blur, we're going to see that the definition of roles will also blur. So I think it's really important to be intentional about how we choose to use computers and software. I think that UX designers have a place in physical product development as a result of this. I see the best collaborations happening when you take a multidisciplinary team of designers and you put them together and have them think about how should a person interact with this product. This is a model of a proton therapy center that was in our shop while our team of human factors engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, industrial designers, user experience designers were thinking about how the cancer clinician and patient could have a better experience. I mean, it's not a good experience to have cancer proton therapy, right? But there might be something that we can do to improve upon that experience for the patient. And there might be something we can do to help the clinician be more efficient and effective in providing that care so that more people can have access to that really great option for treating their cancer. So it's really about everybody working together and applying their creative problem-solving skills so that we can develop the best options for how a person is going to experience a product or a service. And for some products, quite frankly, people who come from the UX background like I did, where they worked on websites for bicycle companies or e-commerce websites, this is going to be a new and scary world, right? This particular project, there were 5 digital software touch points. There was a 60-inch projection image on the wall that the clinician could look at to make sure they're treating the right patient. That's pretty important, right? And that they knew what treatment that patient needed to get that day. There was a tablet-size controller on the wall that they could use to control the lighting and the music in the room to help make the patient comfortable. There was a pendant controller that was suspended from the ceiling. I think Steve's arm is reaching up to where it would be. And it would extend down to where Jared is so that the clinician could position both the patient and the treatment delivery system. There was also a series of software solutions that were created for outside the treatment room, because once this thing is treating, you cannot be in there unless you're the patient. So we were able to design that. And it all started with some research and some strategy around how can we help the clinician and the patient have a better experience. And then the designers and engineers on the team who were able to participate in that research were able to take what they learned in the field, actually visiting clinical sites, and apply that to their process for designing a better experience. And finally, I think the future of UX looks much more participatory than it is today. I think As a UX practitioner, engaging clients in the UX process will help communicate its value so that people can start expanding the scope of UX beyond just that intersection of interaction design and visual design and into some of the other areas of their business and how they operate. And, a lot of people do this already. They call it different things. They call it service design or customer experience. But I think there's still a lot of people who want to know how they can be more human-centered and take into account what people actually need in their product development. And then I think engaging users as a follow-up will increase the odds of delivering products and services that meet their needs and improve their lives. I'd like to open it up for Q&A now. If anybody has any questions or comments. If you're joining via webinar, now would be a good time to type in any questions that you might have, and we'll go ahead and get those answered for you. Yeah, this company hired amateur basketball players to stand in a CES booth for 4 days and just play basketball because of basketball.
Those guys that play like street basketball tournaments?
Yeah.
Where they're all jamming and they had sensors on them and basketball, and it was all about how good the shots were. They had, video monitors up there showing, charting all the shots and what was being made, what wasn't.
How high they were jumping.
And I remember we asked the guy, well, what are you really doing? That's the market. He kind of had a bunch of, that was very precise.
So one thing I noticed during the kind of first part of the core skill set and the last part, you bring up the idea in the beginning of not wanting to have something too polished too quick because you might hinder feedback. Somebody would feel bad that you've done this work, they don't want you to go back to the drawing board. And then near the end, we discussed the idea of the sooner you can go digital, put a digital wireframe in front of someone, the better feedback you might get. Is there kind of a fine line to walk there?
Yeah, there is. So
that there's like, you can't really have your cake and eat it too situation.
Yeah, so I think what I would propose in response to that is when we talk about fidelity, we often think that there's things that are low fidelity and there's things that are high fidelity, when really there's different types of fidelity. So if we think about information architecture and how it contributes structure to the product, there's structural fidelity. There's behavioral fidelity, which is what interaction design can contribute. There's visual fidelity. And then there's contextual fidelity. So if I am designing for a particular person who's trying to complete a particular task in a particular setting or environment, the earliest I can get into that environment where they work and present something that has good structural fidelity, it's got real information, not placeholder lorem ipsum copy, and it has good behavioral fidelity. I click this and then I see this as a result. Those are the types of things you want to get into your prototyping early. I think visual fidelity can come later. I know some people would debate me on that, but I think it's really important to make sure that you have the information people need and that you provide a way for them to access that information and progress through their tasks. And I believe from my experience that you can, if you're smart about it, layer the visuals on later. Oftentimes, the really expensive part of software development is getting that look and feel just right. And I think it's possible to, early in the process, mock up some of the behavior with some realistic information, and then you'll get better feedback from people.
Gotcha. So some of the visual fidelity might come after you've done digital. Those are the things you take into account.
Yep. Good question. Travis?
So you talked about, like, the 5 different steps and how some of them were, common to industrial design, product design, and architect was one of the ones that is more specific to UI. Have you taken that architectural approach or that methodology for mapping it out and utilized that in the product development process for the heart, like the actual product?
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm. So we've worked on some projects recently for clients that incorporate some embedded software. And it's in those projects where we really have an opportunity to think about both the hardware and the software interaction. And sometimes it makes sense for the hardware to drive the software.
Oh, so when I say the hardware, so your speaker there.
Yep.
Like the architect for the interaction for that, not the physical hardware that's driving the software. You know what I'm saying?
So you're talking about the controls and what I see on this,
Thing,
the whole
user
thing.
experience as the person engages with that and mapping it out like you would with the website or the architecture.
Yes.
This is how the person walks up. Do you guys do that as the
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so the experience mapping
Yeah.
that I showed is something that we do for as many projects as we're able to. Sometimes we are building upon an existing body of research, so we think that we understand what the current experience is, so we'll take all of that information that is known and we'll place it into a map so that we can then validate that that is indeed what people are experiencing today. Other times, we and our clients don't know, so we start with some contextual inquiry so that we can learn that. And whether we're talking about a drug delivery system or a medical diagnostic machine or a piece of connected sporting goods equipment, we tend to go through that process. And it can scale, right? We can do that in a couple days. We can do that in a few weeks with some actual field visits. Jesse?
So where does interaction invention come into the field, or what your team does? You know, and after applying a lot of interactions that have been developed by someone else in a way to fill a user need, but somebody's inventing those interactions.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about. So if we go back to Douglas Engelbert, the guy that invented the mouse, so he was a researcher who was given permission to just think and play with how you would interact with computers as machines, right? Oftentimes, when we're working on projects for our clients, we don't have endless R&D time and budget to just explore. So we tend to look at the existing body of design patterns that exist in the world, because often we can develop something that really meets the customer goal and the goal of our client, leveraging those patterns. So it's ultimately a trade-off. It's like, do we want to invent something, therefore extending the time to market because it's going to take us a while to invent it, and it's going to take someone else a while to build that with software? Or do we want to leverage existing patterns that are well established and understood not only by software developers when they need to implement it, but also by users? So it's really a balance. It's fun to be able to invent. I don't think it happens often. I mean, there was a guy who, his name is Lauren Bircher, who invented the pull down to refresh. He had a Twitter app for iPhone that subsequently was bought by Twitter. So Twitter acquired that intellectual property, so when you pull down on a screen and you see like a little spinner and then it refreshes, someone invented that. That didn't exist before. And it's fun to think about, you know, who are the people that get to work on that? I think it's UX designers, programmers too.
Early on in your presentation, you were talking about kind of these eras of computing, and you said that our paradigm for interaction currently is kind of towards a natural form of input. You know, I think we're maybe approaching that, but we're not exactly there, and so I'm kind of curious, do you think that in this current paradigm we're actually going to arrive at that, or is that really part of that next iteration?
I think it's independent of how many computers there are. So I think we're starting to see some of it now, like whether it's Amazon Echo or some of the gestural interactions that we have with touch screens or things like Nintendo Wii and Microsoft Kinect.
And Wii stands out as an example where it's like, oh, in Wii bowling, you could bowl, but you could also just sit there and flick your wrist, right?
You can. And I mean, if you really think about it, just the remote mouse. It's still a pointer, right? So it's not that different. But maybe what is different is an app like Quartz, which is a news application that you have a conversational interaction with. You get all of your news via text message, and you can respond to it with natural language, and then it responds back to you and gives you more information or less information based on how you do it. Those things are happening. So maybe stating that the previous era is replaced by the next era is a mistake, and we're really just like taking the personal computing era, now we're layering some things on top of it as we go. Yeah. Sherry?
So I'm probably showing my age here, and it might just come down to vernacular conversation, but can you help me understand the interplay or perhaps the difference between human factors and what you're doing? Because back, when I got out of school, if we would say things like user interaction or user experience, it had nothing to do with anything digital.
Yeah.
Maybe a button. Maybe,
Yep,
right?
yep.
And so now, if I'm going to say UX, should I be meaning the digital world so that I am communicating with my peers and my audience the correct way?
I don't have an answer for that last part. Because people use it in a variety of different ways, like I wish we could just find a new term or something that describes, we could just call it software design, right? That's what it is usually. Or digital product design. I think the difference between people who design software and call themselves UX and human factors engineers can be very subtle, right? I think human factors engineers are really good at doing user research and often have to be really good at information architecture, because a part of what they do is after they've taken inventory of what people need to do their job and what physical and cognitive limitations they have that prevent them from being able to use their current tools, they're taking an assessment of what is the information I need in order to proceed to the next step. And that's the exact same thing that an information architect is doing. They're just plotting that across the digital information space, and sometimes with human factors, of course, it's not a digital thing. But if you think about, I'm interacting with a medical diagnostic device, and I need my patient to perform an action. And when they do, I need confirmation that it's been successfully performed. And then I need to see the result of the task that the device performs. These are the same types of things that an information architect or an interaction designer are thinking about when they're designing software. So I think there's a lot of overlap there. I think where they diverge a little bit is if we're talking about something that's software-based. I think often the UX designer, the UX team, the team that comes from a background of software, they're perhaps a bit more fluent in the language of software development, so they can assess as they go about their design iteration what's going to be technically feasible, and they can have conversations with the software developers to really vet that out. That might be one difference. But I think it's very nuanced. And I personally don't have a problem with people from other backgrounds or disciplines doing overlapping work. I think from project to project, you really just want to have the best team of people. And if that means it's a human factors engineer with an industrial designer and a UX person, then that's awesome. Yeah?
We have a question from an online participant. Mark asked, where, if at all, do you see cultural biases in user experience design, and how do you accommodate this when you're designing a global product?
Thanks for the question, Mark. That's a really good one. So in my past, I was fortunate and able to work on websites that were used globally. I think with regards to bias, the first thing that jumps out to me is there's a perhaps unfair bias that software in Japan and in China is cluttered and it's overloaded with lots of content and kitsch. And I think that's a cultural sensitivity that people outside of those markets need to be aware of, that is our take on it, but there it's something that people are accustomed to, and it's a preference for how they consume information. So that's one bias that comes to mind. I think with regards to how you approach designing for global products, we were working on something this week where so it's a physical product that has some embedded controls and software, and that product will be used outside of the United States. So it'll be used by people who speak English or French or Spanish. And as we design that product and its interface, we have to think about how the choices we make affect not only the person who speaks English and their user experience, but the impact that that can have on the team that has to translate and localize those product decisions for other markets. So we start to think about, like when we don't have enough space to fit a word because of the crude display technology, and we truncate it or abbreviate it, and we can talk about whether that works or not in English. Are we setting up the person who has to localize that to another language up for failure because they might not be able to find a word that can be abbreviated so succinctly? So things like that, and things like other localization preferences. In this particular product, we have to think about, are they using the standard system of units, or are they using the imperial system of units? And when should a person make that choice? Is that something that they're going to do when they buy the product and unbox it? So we can create an experience for onboarding that allows the user to set their preferences, and then later, during the ongoing use of the product, it can be a bit more removed or hidden? Or do we need to maybe assume the person is going to pick up a product that's already been set up, and because they don't speak the language that the product is communicating to them in, they're going to have a difficult time finding the option to change the language and override those preferences. So it definitely is a consideration, and I think not enough designers are familiar with the process and how it's different when you're designing for global products. Any other questions, Leah, from the webinar attendees?
Not right now.
Cool. Edgar?
There was a lot of information shared today, right? There's other people in the audience are both that are about to start on the journey or in the middle, that's the middle, as you can call it. What is the one caveat that you would give to clients or customers that are starting on this journey? What is the one thing that you want to, piece of advice that you want to share with people that take on this journey?
Yeah, and so the one thing that I would strongly encourage everyone to do in any type of product development is take time to understand your users. So if we can say that that's done, then the next thing would be to work iteratively and experiment. So that as you're working out how you might solve the problem that you know the user has through your observation of their activities and tools, don't wait until you have this precious, perfect design before you put it in front of people, because it's really expensive to do all that work and find out that it's not the right solution. And I think that transcends, software development. It's just good, responsible product development. But I think that particularly in the area of software, which might be new for some companies, maybe they're one of the companies that's thinking about how can we take this version of our physical device and extend its functionality set through some software. Maybe there's an app as an accessory to the physical device so that you can monitor information collected by the hardware sensors. So I think just acknowledging that although there are lots of differences between hardware and software, good product development is human-centered and it's iterative. So take the time to think about what are the assumptions you're making about the design, and let's make sure that we can test those assumptions. Let's put them in front of people and see if our assumption is correct, and if it's not, let's be ready to pivot and change the design so that going into the next iteration it's better for the people who ultimately will have to use it. And then we can avoid some of the more expensive aspects of delaying that finding until much later in the product development process when lots of engineering is done, maybe even marketing and packaging is done, and then you discover a problem once it gets put on store shelf. That's the wrong time to find out about those things.
Any more questions?
What about the user experience when the whole process is done and the users are actually using it?
Yeah, so this is new product development, right? It's a very good distinction. So for people who work on software, they get to enjoy all kinds of advantages that people who work on hardware don't. So with software-based products, there's a whole set of other UX core skills, I think, that come into play. We talked about usability evaluation and user testing, right? But there's teams of people that can just look at product telemetry and look at the analytics and begin to understand the behavior of users without talking to them directly. I think that it's best to use both approaches, both the qualitative and the quantitative research method, so that you can really understand the kind of depth and breadth of the pain and frustration that customers feel when using a product. That would be one difference. And I think approaching evolutionary design would be a little different than new product development. You know, if you're already building off of an existing product, you have the actual product to use in your prototyping. So there you might skip a lot of those steps about paper prototyping or some kind of crude clickable prototypes with wireframes, and especially if you're well-versed and fluent in the behavior and visual design of the current product, you might start just building upon what's already there and roll things out to a subset of actual users with some multivariant or A/B testing tools so that you can begin to assess which of the approaches to improving the product are working best with actual users. I mean, this is a practice that Amazon has perfected. They'll tweak the smallest little thing and see what impact it has on their overall revenue. And then if it has a negative effect, they'll change back or try a different option. And there's a famous story about Google A/B testing 34 different shades of blue for hyperlinks to see which one performed best in their search results. Some of those practices can cause designers to get frustrated and find new jobs. But I think when you're talking about working on an existing product, you should acknowledge that there's both like the art and the science of design that can be employed together there. There's a great story that I heard about a chef, Ferran Adrià, who's in Catalonia, Spain. He had what was referred to as the world's best restaurant for several years in a row. And he and his team operated the restaurant for 6 months each year, during which there was, no availability whatsoever. You had to book like months or years in advance to get a seat at a table. And the food was top-notch. And then in the 6 months that they closed the restaurant, they went into a kitchen in Barcelona and they spent 6 months experimenting on food. So they would go to the local markets, buy different food, take it back to their test kitchen, and they would prepare it in different ways. And they would document it rigorously, like a scientist, taking photos and making notes about what happens when you prepare it this way or when you combine it with this other ingredient. And then near the end of that 6-month period, they would take all of their research findings and they would use that to inform their menu creation process. So they were kind of spending half of the year working as scientists and the other half of the year working as designers and artists. But it was really because they did all that science that they were able to think creatively and make really good choices about the menu. So I like to think that for software-based products where you can kind of peek in and see how people are using it, that's your time to collect data and be a researcher. And then you can provide that either to yourself or to the design team so that they can put constraints around the design that they're going to do and really have freedom to think creatively within that space instead of having this total blank canvas.
And then how do you make those design decisions as a team? Because sometimes.
Yeah, it's tough. I think we could probably have a whole talk about that, but I think if you're being user-centered and you can support design decisions both with data and by pointing back to the specific problem that you're trying to solve for users, and you can approach it objectively and remove people's personal subjectivity to it, I think it's easier to navigate those decisions, but obviously we're people and people have opinions, so that can be difficult and challenging.
Well, thanks everyone. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone here. Thanks to everyone online. We know we have a lot of options to spend your evening, and we really appreciate you spend today's evening
with us. We hope you found it valuable. There will be probably another 2 or 3 events this year. We don't know the topics quite yet, but we make sure to keep you posted, and hopefully we will see you again at another event. And have a good rest of the evening, and most importantly, have a safe trip home.
Thank you very much.